I'm a good bit above the stream now. Earlier I was a good bit above it. Been climbing for about 20 minutes and then it was downhill and I was back down to the stream. And I said, that's a bummer, you know, because I wanted to keep climbing, you know, I wanted to keep climbing. And then I turned the corner and there's another hill and I've been climbing up this hill. It goes up a bit more. Who knows, around the corner there, around the turn, maybe it'll go back down to the stream again. It's kind of like, you know, the whole notion of psychological torture, that you're not making any progress. What is it? Digging a hole and then they used to do it to prisoners of war. They make them dig a hole and then fill it in. Yeah. But yeah, I'm still happy to be out here. So I've been reading Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. I read it in my 20s. And I started rereading it last week. And I'm almost finished it. It's a novella, so, you know, it's not even, is it even 80 pages long? But for those who haven't read it, or who don't know anything about it, it's from the absurdist literature. And Kafka was I think he was a Czech. He lived in what was called Czechoslovakia, I think. He was a Jew, and he had some issues with his father. There's a book called A Letter to My Father. I actually bought, I never read it, but years and years ago when I was trying to study German, I bought a little pocket-sized copy of that book. And if memory serves me correctly, it was called Ein Brief von meinem Vater. And yeah, he had big issues with his father. Now, in this novella, The Metamorphosis, I can't remember the main characters' names. I'm terrible at remembering names. It begins with S anyway. We'll just call him S. S wakes up. I think his alarm clock goes off. He has to get up and go to work. He's a sort of door-to-door salesman. And his family depends on him. His parents are elderly. Well, I guess they're in their 60s. Then he's got a younger sister, and he wants her to go to some musical school as well. So he's trying to save money for her. So he's really the breadwinner in the house. But he wakes up and, much to his dismay, he discovers that he's no longer in human form. He's now like a human-sized cockroach. And he doesn't know how to get off the bed. He can't really control his legs. His legs seem to be moving of their own volition. And yeah, his mother calls him at the door. I think he has locked the door from the inside. He locked it the night before, so they can't enter. But they're calling him, and he responds, but he's not sure if they could understand him. But eventually his boss comes to the house asking why he's not at the office. He was supposed to arrive at the office. And I don't know, to get his orders or whatever. And they're at him to open up and want to see him. And it's this idea of, you know, of the corporation entering your house. Entering the privacy of your home. I remember that's what I took from it when I read it in my 20s. Anyway, they eventually discover what he's like, discover his form. They're repulsed by him. I think when he leaves his bedroom, the father attacks him with a rolled up newspaper and a stick or something, and he actually injures him, because when S is scuttling back into his room, he can't fit through the door. and he damages the side of his, I don't know, his abdomen or thorax, whatever. So what eventually happens is they know, like the parents know, and his sister knows that it's him, but he's no longer in human form, and he can no longer speak to them, and most importantly, he can no longer make money. The dependents have to become independent. They have to start thinking of ways now to bring home the bacon, because the son is a giant cockroach. And they care for him in a way. They bring in food. He doesn't eat it because it's fresh food. Then they bring in rotten food and he eats that. And then they start removing they come in every day to clean as well. And he, as a mark of respect to them, he doesn't want to terrify them, he hides under the sofa. He's able to crawl under the sofa. I think the sister even brings in a bed sheet, and that helps to cover up his body completely, so it's not sticking out from the sofa. And he gets used to the routine. He doesn't like it, obviously, but he gets used to it, and then he discovers that he can walk up the walls, he can crawl on the ceiling, and he loves that. He realizes he can just hang from the ceiling for hours, thinking of nothing really. Occasionally he manages to kind of stand on a chair on his two back legs and stare out the window, kind of, again, just lost, not thinking of much, just staring out, not really thinking of much. And yeah, finally, as the family becomes independent, as the father gets back out and starts working, he becomes, I'm more or less telling you the story, even though I've a few more pages to read. I don't know, I have 10 pages left. But yeah, I remember most of it anyway, from whatever, 15 years ago. As the father gets back out and he's working again, he seems to become younger. He's less feeble. The mother starts doing knitting and selling garments, and I think the little sister picks up some work. I don't know, doing deliveries or errands or something, I don't know. But as they become more independent, I would say, and this is my perspective now, their loyalty to him has reached its limit. They're kind of waiting for him to die. I would say they even want him to die. They won't kill him, but they want him to die, because he's no longer useful to the family. And, from another perspective, you could say that it would be a humane act for him to just very quickly die and no longer have to be in the situation he's in. So loyalty, yeah. I would say in a way their loyalty to him wanes. And Kafka, as far as I know, he had some theories on family life. I think he was resentful of family life. But the theme of loyalty came to me a few days ago, and I think it was independent. It came independently from reading Kafka, but I think I can tie it in. The idea of loyalty. How far is your loyalty going to go with someone? It's not unwavering. At some stage, you'll have to reevaluate your link to that person, your friendship with that person. And you'll have to sever it. You'll have to sever it. Because severing it is the right thing to do in the general scheme of things. I like to think that I'm pretty loyal to people. If someone does me a good turn, I try and do it back. I try to be nice to people. not overly nice, but nice, respectful. If I feel someone has shafted me in some way, I don't get vexed. I don't lose my head. I just sever the link and move on. And I don't dwell on it. I'm too old to dwell on things like this. I think when you're young, when you're a teenager, you would dwell on disloyalty of being stabbed in the back. But as you get older, you don't really care. You just say, fuck it. That guy's a bollocks. Fuck him. you forget about it, you know. So I was thinking of loyalty, and I remember when I was in my 20s, I'd say I was in my early 20s, give or take. I was renting a room in a flat, and I had two flatmates. At this time there was a girl and there was a guy. And they were both very nice people. I got on very well with them. They had a good sense of humour. The guy was a little bit forgetful in ways. I would say his forgetfulness was dangerous, not just for him but for us as well. And an example I could give is this guy. He loved cooking, so he would work all day. He worked in an office, and when he'd get home in the evening, he used to get home before me because I used to work crazy hours. He'd start cooking in the kitchen, and this was a small flat, so it was like a sitting room with a kitchenette, and he would just take over the kitchenette. He'd have every saucepan, every pan. He'd be making about 7 different meals, all for himself. And most of that he'd probably throw out afterwards. I think cooking was his therapy. Whatever floats your boat, because it looked very stressful watching him cooking, keeping his eye on all these different saucepans and pans and the oven, checking his watch, checking the time. But yeah, what he would do is he would cook from, it could be from 7 o'clock in the evening. I'd probably get home at 8:30 or so. And I would say most evenings during the week I would just grab something from the supermarket, some ready-made thing, because I knew the kitchen would be out of bounds. And I just wasn't bothered getting into an argument about it because I was too tired from the long day at work. So just grab something handy on the way home. And you get in and, you know, there'd be steam everywhere and grease and whatever. In fairness, he cleaned up after himself. But the problem was his forgetfulness. And his forgetfulness was his leaving the cooker on at midnight when he'd retire for the night, when he'd go to his room. And I generally be in bed by 11, be asleep by about 11:30. Had to be up early in the morning. And some nights, not many nights, but some nights I'd get up to go for a piss. It could be like 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd walk by the sitting room kitchenette, and with the corner of my eye I'd see one of the rings on the cooker red hot where he hadn't switched it off. And I'd go over and I'd turn it off, and then the next morning before I'd head out and he'd be getting up, I'd say, "Hey man, you left the cooker on again last night." And he'd be like, "Are you sure?" I'd be like, "I'm sure." He'd be like, "Oh, I'll try and make an effort. I'll try to be more careful." And I'd say, "Yeah, you come on, you know. I don't want to go to sleep and wake up dead, you know." That's what I'd say to him. And this happened on several occasions. And I'd get on to him and he'd say, he'd say, I'm really making an effort, I'll do my best, I'll try to remember to turn it off. See which way this wind is. There's suddenly a bit of wind here. Try and keep the phone out of it. Right. Anyway, long story longer. The landlord used to come round every week to collect the rent. And one evening he came, and this guy, this flatmate, was in the sitting room ironing a shirt. So he was standing, there was a bit of space behind the sofa, and he was standing there ironing his shirt. And I was sitting in an armchair, and the landlord came in. He sat down in an armchair, and the landlord was speaking to me about, I don't know, something to do with something in Ireland at the time, something that was in the news. And the flatmate was ironing away, and suddenly the doorbell rang, or it was the intercom, whatever. And my flatmate said, "Oh, it's for me, and he ran downstairs. About 2 minutes later, the landlord he stopped mid-sentence, and he kind of tilted his head upwards, and you could see his nostrils moving. He was sniffing the air. He said, "Something's burning." And we turned around and looked, and the flatmate had I shouldn't laugh. The flatmate had put the iron right down on top of his shirt, like flat down on it, so it was burning through the shirt and burning through the fabric of the ironing board, and there was black smoke hurling out from it. I ran over, I plugged out the iron. The landlord was furious. The landlord was very stingy. He owned the entire building of flats. And I'm guessing that he was so stingy that he probably didn't pay insurance. So the very idea that, a forgetful flatmate could burn down his entire building of flats. He had about a dozen flats in the building. A goofy flatmate could burn down one of his investments. I think he had a number of buildings. It made him absolutely furious, and he immediately asked me, he said, "Is this the first time? Is this the first time he's forgotten? Is this the first time he's forgotten?" Something like this. "Is this the first time?" His face was purple. And I had to think very quickly. And I thought, if I say no, and I tell him about the cooker, the landlord is going to have him turfed out this evening. My flatmate is going to be homeless. He's probably going to have to spend a few nights in a hostel, and it could take him months to find another room, because Dublin, I think it's even worse now, but back then it was still really bad trying to find accommodation. It was brutal. You'd go to see a room, and there'd be like 100 people going to see the same room at the same time. You had to make an impression. And that's how I got that room. I made an impression. I arrived early, very early. And they offered me tea, and I sat down, and I didn't get back up. And I kept chatting to them. That's how I got the room. I made an impression. I made sure I didn't just become, 99 out of the 100. I made an impression. I made a good impression. But I was thinking of this guy. He's going to be, if I say no, it's not the first time. And I tell him about the cooker, how it's happened several times before. Getting up at night, and the ring on the cooker is red hot where it's still on. If I tell him that, my flatmate is out on his ear. He's going to be homeless. Best case scenario, he'll be in a hostel for a month. I had to think this, in a millisecond. And eventually I said, "Yes, it's the first time." And the landlord said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am." he said, right. And then the landlord came back, or sorry, the flatmate came back up the stairs. His friend was with him. And the landlord roared at him and said, you fucking idiot. You fucking gobshite. You left the fucking iron on the fucking ironing board. And the flatmate was like, oh God, I'm sorry. I must have panicked when I heard the doorbell. I'm so sorry. It's never happened before. The landlord, he still wasn't decided. Yeah, he was looking at the flatmate and he was summing him up, and he was thinking, will I kick this fucker out now? Will I give him a second chance? And eventually he decided to give him a second chance. He had he had over €1,000. What would have been he would have got from our flat at that time, and that's many years ago. He probably had about €1,400 in his pocket from the three of us. One flat. He had about 11 more to visit in that building. Then he'd go to more buildings. He probably, his trip to Dublin every week, he was probably collecting 30 grand, maybe 40 grand in rent. Back then, most of it would have been in cash. I'm sure he got bank transfers as well, but obviously he, like everyone else, I'm sure he would have preferred the cash. But yeah, I lied to the landlord. I told him it was the first time when it wasn't the first time, because I had loyalty to my flatmate. I didn't want to see him homeless. And yet I knew at the time that should things continue as they were, should my flatmate continue almost burning the place down, I'd eventually have to sever that loyalty, and I'd have to tell the truth to the landlord. And that would be a difficult thing to do. It would be a very difficult thing to do, but it would be necessary, because loyalty, unfortunately, has its limits. Especially when the other party is falling way below standards. Standards that go between life and death.